Well, again, thanks everybody. Thanks for the great information, great sharing what you learned this year in the chat. It's always inspiring to hear from educators and people who work with our kids every day. So thanks for sharing that. That's really meaningful. So what we're going to do this morning is what we're here to talk about is what has the past year done, both to us, but to our done, so to speak. How has it impacted our children? How are we thinking about our kids, given what the last 18 months, 3 full school years impacted by a pandemic has done to the narratives around them, around us, and around this, this phrase that we've heard, I think, too much of, whatever we mean by learning loss, right? So, but it's really a reflection and thinking with you about what has this year done to our kids. So I'm going to start, just for those of you who are new to Innocent Classroom or beginning to learn about Innocent Classroom, a very quick overview about what we do, how the perspective and framework that we bring to all of our partnerships, which is then going to lead us into a conversation that Julian and Jamie are really going to lead with the program team through the conversation that you registered for. Really, how do we think about our kids in the midst of what's been 3 tumultuous school years for us and them? So I want to start. Try and start every gathering of Innocent Classroom educators and Innocent Classroom with our promise. The Innocent Classroom promise and our commitment is that every child deserves to feel free, or to feel innocent, that is, to be free of the influence and impact of stereotypes and stereotype expectations every time they are with you. So what innocence is for us is very specific. It's spaces and relationships that are free of the negative impact of racial bias and stereotypes and stereotype expectations, in a way that the child is aware, and however they're aware, that when they're with you, these narratives, these societal cultural narratives, have no power over your relationship. And because of that, so our goal is to give educators across the board, from superintendents through paras to bus drivers, the capacity and the practice so that they can build relationships with every single child, particularly Black, Brown, and Indigenous children, to create conditions where innocence is possible, in which the child expects it, which means for us is that every child will have the greatest opportunity for success in our spaces at their highest level. So this is what we try. These are the conditions, if you will, that we believe innocence creates. That the hard work that we do for children every day in spaces where innocence is pervasive, versus where systemic racism might be pervasive, where innocence is pervasive, children can actually perform how we want them to perform, and more importantly, how they want to perform as scholars and students. Alex Pate is the creator of the Innocent Classroom. He is all of our boss. He's all of our bosses here from the Innocent Classroom team. He created it to end racial bias. And this is a quote from his book, an aspect of racial bias, but it's what he wants educators to do, and what Innocent Classroom partnerships to do, is to give educators the skill set, like I said, to relieve and to destroy the narratives that a child might have become led to believe about themselves, about what their role is in school, who they are, and how they're to perform based on negatives, cultural, societal narratives that have nothing to do with them as a human being, as a child, and as a student. So again, this is Alex's vision, but it's really fundamentally to put an end to where racial bias interferes with our capacity to relate to each other and to be with each other, to get what we want to get out of that relationship. So I've said relationships. It is a relational approach to dismantling racial bias, by which each child individually is connected to their unlimited potential. And I think we all know this. We've experienced it in our own lives. I mean, it's pretty simple. We're going to learn better from people who we believe, with the emphasis on belief, who we believe care about us. We know educators care about us, but does the child actually believe it? Have we created the conditions in which it is a certainty that people here believe in me? Which brings us to another aspect that you'll hear a little bit about today. Every child experiences their reality as they experience their reality, right? It's child specific. So every relationship is unique. Every relationship between teacher and child is that relationship. It's not a relationship with another child. So there's a child specific and teacher driven aspect of the work, which makes it very child centered. Again, so it's relational, it's ending bias, ending racial bias in such a way so that there's possibilities in the classroom that might not otherwise exist. And before I pass if you will, over to Julian and Jamie, this is where every Innocent Classroom workshop begins. And because what we want to talk about our engagement with this question: what does American society tell you about children of color? This is from all of the relationship we want to have with kids, that, if you will, the outcomes we desire for them in classroom, to be students, to achieve, to understand the unlimited potential that they embody. This list, this question, what does American society tell you about children of color, for us is the biggest thing that interferes with that child's capacity to believe that you're there for them, that a teacher's there for them, that the school system is there for them, and that the system is actually for them. That makes sense. So what we do is ask this question, and want to emphasize, it's not what educators believe. This isn't what you believe. The question is, what are you told? What does society tell you about the children in your classrooms? Not what do you believe, but what are you told about it? Because that narrative, that story, unfortunately, the children know it, we know it. Even though we hate it, abhor it, and don't want it to be present, we ask this question. So just do a minute to think about that. We won't do the full, if you will, exercise here. But when we ask that question, this is representative of the list we get: violent, ungrateful, not deserving, don't belong, alien, addicted, rappers, teen pregnancy. I don't know if athletic is on this list, but if it was, it wouldn't look so good on a list like this. But this is the list we get in all of our partnerships. No matter where we ask this question, we get a list like this. So this is the, if you will, the cultural narrative. This is the thing that interferes with our capacity to reach children in a way that they believe that we're there for them. If we're not actively undermining this list in our relationship with them, proving to them that we don't see them as this list, we can't be neutral, is all I'm trying to say. Innocent Classroom asks for action to disprove this list in your relationship with a child, so the child can actually believe you're there for them. Otherwise, this list has too much power. So it's about the relationships we build in Innocent Classroom are about disempowering this list and replacing this list with innocence. And I think this is stuff, we don't talk about it very much, but these stereotypes force their victims to anticipate these assumptions about them and to compensate and adjust the behavior accordingly. So for us, every child of color, every Black, brown, and Indigenous child in our system is trying to figure out how they're being seen by their educators, by the system itself. Am I seen this way? And then I have to adjust my behavior to either maybe this is the only way I'm going to be seen, is if you see me as dangerous or violent. It's the only way I can get what I need from you, your attention. The only way I can connect to you or get validated by you is if I show you a bad thing, a bad behavior, let's just say, a behavior that results in a bad outcome. But to the child, it's like, the only way you can see me is through this. This is what I'm going to do. Or a child fights against this list. Like, I'm going to show you. Neither are those responses for us are responses out of innocence, out of that child's humanity, who they are, presenting themselves to you as a fully formed human being. So these narratives, again, these violent cultural narratives that are all too present, do force, let's just say, victims to compensate and adjust their behavior accordingly. So what Innocent Classroom is attempting to do in its partnerships and in its work is give teachers the skill set, both the knowledge and the skill set, to overcome this, so that children no longer have to compensate in our systems. They can simply be and receive what you want them to be, what you want them to receive, sorry. So that's the quick, I don't know how many minutes that was, Mark, that was like 9, run through of Innocent Classroom. But now we want to pivot to the conversation we invited this morning. And to do that, I'm going to hand it over to Jamie.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks. And, good morning, everyone. Great to see you all. I know Julian and I and full team have been anticipating this conversation for some time now, because it isn't one we are outside of, but one that is constantly there and swirling around us right now. And I'm having a moment too, as I'm seeing people come into the room who are coming to this conversation, because there's people who, man, I've been in this conversation with for 10 years, for 5 years, maybe for 1 year, in many different positions. From Chad, it is exciting to see you, from South St. Paul. I got to give a huge shout out for Amber for being here, because Amber was sitting in the room when I first was introduced to Innocent Classroom in North Minneapolis. I mean, there's just this broad spectrum of people and humans who are thinking about what it is our children are going through right now, right? And what role we have to play in that. And I've been in the education field for nearly 20 years, in and out of the classroom, kindergarten through college. Again, huge shout out Lakshmakanta for being here from the community college lens and what innocence means. I mean, this isn't an understated question. What are we talking about when we're talking about learning, when we're talking about learning loss as it's being framed, when we're talking about the impact of the last 18 months on our children and to be honest, on us, right? As we are coming to our roles and our spaces, and I know it's, oh my gosh, nearly October. And so this isn't August, and we just have all the anticipation of what's coming. But we have a reality of the kids in front of us, kids who we care deeply about, kids who we know a lot about, kids who we're just meeting, but all of them falling into a universal experience of these last 18 months that's showing up very individual and unique to each one of them. And so this isn't, Julian and I and team don't necessarily, we don't have a deck or some wisdom to drop on you, but a way of thinking about how we're thinking about this that can radically transform our approach to children and the opportunities and challenges in front of us. So before we even go any further, and thank you for bearing with me there, we want to hear from you. From the starting point of the pandemic to now, we've been in conversation with educators in schools across the country, really wading through the challenges of going to virtual work, to being in virtual, being in person, and to the politics of the conversation of your humanities, your existences in your work every day. And so we wanted to pause today and hear again from you, to hear what is happening. What is that conversation in your space, right? What is the narrative or conversation about our children and the impact of the past couple of years that's happening in your school or district or community? What does that look like? What does it sound like? Who's having it? How are you feeling about it? Maybe you're even in a role where you're hearing it from kids. So we're going to jump into breakouts because we want you to talk to one another, meet one another. This is such a beautiful, brilliant, wonderful community of those of you excited about innocence. But I know you're all deep thinkers and inspired and hopeful about this work, which I've just seen Keith pop up. Hey, Keith, great to have you here too. So I want you to talk to one another. And when we come back, that's where we're going to open up our conversation. And our learning today is, what is that narrative? What's happening and what can we do about it? I think that we've got everybody back now. So I'm excited to, I don't know, I'm excited. I'm interested to hear where this conversation took us. And so without saying anything more, who's willing to bring to the space the conversation you just had, either things you talked about or thoughts you had, or maybe something you didn't get to share? What's happening? How are we talking about our kids and the impact of this last 18 months? What are you hearing? How's it sitting with you? So feel free to unmute, jump on in.
We got some chat responses. Conflict between teacher and student need.
Monroe, are you willing to say a little bit more about that?
Sure. I'm Karinia Monroe, and
thank you.
Part of what we discussed was the conflict between, and it's kind of where we ended off. It was just the beginning of a very good conversation of what teachers are often looking for and need, sometimes are in conflict with what students are looking for and need. And that idea that, the example that was given was, the teacher looking for respect, and that's their number one need, while the student's looking for connection, and how that constant need and for looking for the connection is upsetting that teacher's kind of constant need for respect and control, and how those two sometimes, and if we can get, in my view, if we can get teachers to look at that discrepancy, that might lead us to a place that we can have a better conversation.
Yeah, Karinia, thank you. And thanks for correcting me on your name. I don't know who was in your group, but that is, it's a really, really insightful conversation, which is based on two humans existing in this space, coming back off 18 months of not probably having our core humanity really be met, right? Whether it be as an educator, whether it be as a child, whether it be as a parent, whether it be as a leader. And even before we walked back in through those doors this fall, we were full of a level, especially our children, and especially our Black, Brown, and Indigenous children, we're full of a level of amplified wondering, maybe amplified disbelief, maybe amplified anxiety about what awaited them on the other side of those doors, right? If I haven't been in relationship, had good interactions, I've only been aware of a conversation about how I'm behind, or my family wasn't able to support me, or I never logged in, and I'm about to come back to that classroom. And what I really need to know is that I can be seen as a child who just needs to be connected. And I'm being met with, okay, well, we got to get caught up on learning loss, and we got to make sure that we sit down, take these tests, do the homework, get these things done, get caught up, right? The physical, mental, spiritual impact of that starts to really make sense, right? For that same child then who 5 days into it stopped showing up, right? 2 days into it shut down. Day one came in, popped off, threw stuff across the classroom, and went and found the paraprofessional that they knew 2 years ago was in good relationship with them. And as the educator, I'm like, hold up, I'm trying to get things under control. We need to have respect in this classroom, right? I need to know that that's happening in order to make sure that we can make the progress. I need respect from this world because I've been disrespected in many ways as an educator, right? I've been taken it, it's been bad in this last couple of years, and we see these things come together. And then we push and we push and we push and we push and we push, and we feel that pushing actually taking us further away from the thing that's in front of both of us, a child's natural curiosity and desire to engage and be in relationship, and an educator's natural desire to engage and love and be in relationship, that we know is the only solution towards this bigger conversation of learning loss. That's really right on, really smart. What else I see? Alyssa, you've heard some other people's narratives. Was there anything that was surprising to you or different than what you had been hearing?
Yes, and I forgot his first name, so I apologize, but Mr. Reynolds was sharing some reflections and conversations of his older students. He works at a different level than I do in it. I really hope he'll chime in, not to just call him out, but if he's comfortable. It was just absolutely amazing and gave me a lot of hope to hear some of the conversations and things the older students are doing and initiatives they're taking on to grow. It was just, it gave me a lot more hope. Let's put it that way, just to hear from someone who works with older students and what those students are doing for our future.
And thank you. I'll share what we discussed with the older students I spoke with last week. What they basically were saying is that they're tired of the adults that are supposed to be role models having controversy over mask and over CRT and all these other things, that they were the ones, our students are saying, we are the ones who walk the hallway. We're the ones going to the classrooms. We're the one expected to do, to study and to learn and do all these things. They're kind of confused on some of the things because they're more compliant than adults would imagine. What they were stating was that the initiative that they took up upon themselves was that they're not going to wait for us to figure out CRT. They have groups after school that they volunteer with, and they assign a CRT subject matter to each student that is to prepare themselves and present to a large group of students online each week. And so they're saying, you are telling us what we can and can't learn. You've never asked us what we want to learn. So we'll push the envelope and we'll teach ourselves while you guys are sitting there trying to figure it out. And they've been doing that for weeks and months. And I found it amazing that you're telling us that we're not supposed to learn this. We're going to learn it and teach it to each other while you guys are trying to figure it out. So I applaud my high school students for taking the initiative because I found that very much avant-garde. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. There's just so much that is beautiful about that. And, you know, and there's also so much that isn't, right? Which is our kids are so aware of the conversation we're having about them, right? In that exists in ways that say kids are broken, they haven't learned, it's a problem, it's going to be so much work, we're exhausted, to masks, to critical race theory, to vaccinate. I mean, there's nothing in any of the conversations that are saying, what about the kids? How are the kids doing? How are you doing? Right, Jaquan, how are you doing, Shalina? How are you doing, Meng? Instead of saying, our kids are suffering, let's go over here and talk about it, right? This must have damaged them, let's go and plan around them. And our kids are hearing not a level of care, not a level of engagement, not a level of innocence, but a level of a narrative being piled on top of the narrative that Matt just talked about. We already knew that a narrative existed about us, and now add to that 2 years of being seen as left behind, further away, not caring, late, whatever that means, right? And it layers on and on. And if we listen to our kids, or we see what's going on with our kids, we can see that they're thinking about the thing that we're thinking about in a very different and important, I'd say critical way. I think that lines up in many ways to what Jolene said. And as a educator, this is one of the most clear points. It seems so simple that recognizing children need to be seen as individuals first leads us to a classroom in which the collective makes sense in lots of ways. And at the same time, we are conditioned, we are trained, we are given patterns that lead us away from that as quickly as possible. And my argument would be that a conversation about learning loss, or how we're talking about it, actually takes us really far away from the understanding of individual students' experience, right? Or what Keith's talking about, like what it is that they're needing, not just, I mean, there are Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Those things are important. This is real. There's social emotional learning. Those things are real. And there are academic needs. This is real, but there's no way to understand what it is we need to do by pulling out of it and saying all kids, or this group of kids, or all low-income kids, or all of our Black kids, or all of our kids from this neighborhood, or all of the kids in 3rd grade, because it's almost a guarantee that our approach will fail the kids who need us most. Right. And I will argue that one, if that makes anybody feel a little heightened, right? But like when we think about, and I don't know Keith's kids, but I'm trying my best to think about those individual children who are opening up to him, how they're hearing the conversation and how they're responding to it. And how do we do what Jolene is saying? How do we, right, Shalina, I love that, right? It's like, how do we let children lead us while also maintaining, right? There's no sense of abdicate your responsibility as educators, leaders, lovers of children, right? But both of those things can happen here. And what else do people hear? This is really beautiful.
I would just like to say something based upon Keith's conversation. And please forgive me, I don't remember where I read it, okay? But when we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's been some new research done that food and shelter are not the basic need. It is the relationship that you have with somebody, because nobody's going to take food from you or shelter from you if they don't trust you. And building that relationship and having that connection with the kids is imperative if we are going to begin to hear them and what they need. And I think one of the things we talked about in our group is that educators have been so used to just taking that curriculum and oh, the curriculum says do this, it says do this, it says do this, and staying on target as far as what needs to be done when. And the children are just kind of being pulled along. And there's no stopping to see, okay, what is the best approach for this? Why do I have to be the guru in the classroom? And learning how to differentiate, not only based on data, but based upon where your children are.
Yeah, right on. Right. That's, for those of you who are Innocent Classroom connected, you know that that is 100%, 1,000% of the foundation we stand on. That relationship is actually, as educators, the most critical concern, right? The most, maybe not the most critical concern, but the most critical foundation that we can build in our classroom, right? That we can do, or in our relationship with a child, whether we're a paraprofessional, we're the nutrition services, we're the secretary, that if a child can walk into our space, and Matt said this, with a belief that this space is for them, right? That the people there care about them, which is an epistemological shift in some ways, right? How we think about how our kids are thinking about this is we can't operate on any assumption that a child comes to us believing in our care just by nature, right? And not because our care isn't genuine. It's not because our care doesn't come from a great place. It's not that we all don't care about children, but it's by the time they walk into our doors, there's every logical reason to not believe that every single one of us can care for them in a way that gets to this innocence, right? That cuts through or minimizes the impact of a greater world that tells them that this place isn't for them, right? That they are at the back end of a gap, that somehow they're right, that they're not going to succeed in this space. And over again, no matter how well intended that conversation, if I'm 5, 6, 7, 12, 16, by the time I'm in high school, how many times have I been talked about as a child who can't succeed in this place or needs extra care or right? Instead of a child who's experiencing a number of things that are real, but still just needs to be an innocent kid, a kid who just needs to be connected, or a sense of belonging, or a sense of stability, right? And every single one of us, I guarantee you, every single child comes in to this space wondering if that is the thing that they can be seen for, not their trauma, not their collective experience of COVID, not caught up in a story of how the world has damaged them. And it is true, our Black, brown, Indigenous children get wounded and damaged by this world over and over again. And so when they come to our spaces, there's that space we have to not just assume, not just hope that it happens by chance, but find a way to intentionally block, keep out, hold each other accountable, hold ourselves accountable to that narrative never creeping in, right? To our conversations, to our thoughts, to our engagements with children. It doesn't change our expectations. It doesn't change our responsibilities, the task at hand, the reason you all do the work, but it does change maybe our starting point, right? The starting block that we're jumping off of each year, each day, maybe each hour, as we're running towards or running with our children. Julian, are you thinking anything that I'm not catching?
No, not at all. I mean, you're inspiring the masses. It's really beautiful. The conversation is really powerful. As you said that, Shalina just said this deficit approach does the children of color a disservice. And yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I think, and Shalina, like the way we end up talking about it, it's not even a deficit approach so much as this guilty approach where the narratives plague children of color, our Black, brown, and Indigenous children in particular, in such a specific way that they're fully plagued and labeled as not good enough and not welcomed and not able to achieve in our spaces, so far removed from the moment they even walk into our classrooms that it's not even considered a deficit anymore. It's considered like the norm of being as relates to that child and their identity. And the norm of being in our classroom is everything that they're not. Those are all narratives that are telling our children who they're supposed to be and how they're supposed to show up and how to not believe that love can live there for you. So yeah, we need to change how we're thinking about our children, change the way we're thinking about the impacts of our system on our kids too. Not that because one, we need to understand systemic oppression fully, but we need to understand the impacts of it on the individual who's coming to us and how do we disprove that for them in our relationship. And that is beyond a strength model, this good model, it's what is that innocent individual child's humanity begging for pre all of this narrative, and with this narrative being in their identity, the narrative dictating who they are and how they move through the world, they're still looking for something in their humanity. That scenario that was laid out earlier of the child who's in that classroom screaming for their connection, that's a child, if they felt fully connected and innocent in that space, they would know how to communicate that need for connection differently to that educator, because that educator would know who that child is and not see them as the narrative of what it means to be a Black boy that doesn't deserve connection, not in the way that they're asking for it. So the ways that we get caught up in these patterns are already pre-written by these narratives. So beyond this strength model of like, so what are you actually good at? It's what do you need and what do you deserve? And then we can figure out the strengths that come with that child and understand the weaknesses as something that's theirs and not something that was pre-written or about just who their identity. So often in the innocent child, we talk about it differently in a way because an innocent child will still have bad days. An innocent child can still be upset, can still be sad, can still need help. All of that is okay because that's being a child. But an innocent child will believe in us as their partner in whatever they're asking for. So that's that space where we can discover their strengths and weaknesses in a way that's human and not damning. So yeah, I mean, I'm just validating everything that I'm hearing and just how powerful it is to, one, just this group of educators who have been hearing these same stories for the past 18 months. And it's not making any of your jobs easier. It's just new levels to the stories that children of color have been dictated by for a lifetime. The pandemic was a big reason to distrust the system and distrust the world around us, but it wasn't the first reason to distrust the system around us for so many of our kids who have experienced this system in this way. So that's why the response remains this relational, one-to-one, let me understand how this is impacting you, and then let's build that space of innocence in that relationship. So I'm just inspired by the conversation and really cool things are happening. And I don't want to miss anything. So let me go back on mute and read people's comments.
It is such a powerful point to make over and over, is that the pandemic is devastating. It's hurtful, it's harmful. And in the course of a child's life, it is another piece, right? As they come to our spaces, that's going to live in how they think about or believe this space can hold them, welcome them, care for them. And as one of the greatest charges we can do, one is move out of assuming that our spaces can naturally be a way for our kids, right? That they can be a space where innocence can just happen. Is that, to Julian's point, many of our patterns or the way that narrative lives, the narrative that Matt presented to us, sometimes goes unnoticed, in many ways goes unspoken, right? Or we're able to talk about it and then we say, but not in our spaces. We don't believe in that thing. That doesn't live here. And in many ways, it matters whether or not we believe it lives there, but it more importantly matters whether or not our children believe that it lives in anything that we're doing. And there's no way to in many ways almost guarantee, I don't think it's a guarantee that the narrative is so loud, but to ensure that it isn't creeping in, then to really understand and try to think about how and why our kids are thinking about this, right? And so we in Innocent Classroom go through this with many of our educators, of there's a way that our kids show up, right? We talk about behaviors, we see behaviors, our kids are using the way that they show up in many ways that either is logical, not logical, it's just happening, right? So this is what we see. And we might have been seeing some of these things from kids already. Maybe some behaviors that were predictable, maybe some that are surprising us of kids that we knew or wondering what's happening, right? Is maybe some level of silence, maybe some level of disruption or unresponsive. And this is all generated in some ways, if not very strongly, from the anticipation or belief that this thing lives in our space. That might live in the relationship with you, right? If I believe that you might believe this thing about me, then it impacts what's in my brain, what's in my body, what's in my emotions, right? And comes out this way. And then maybe they hear or they're responded to in a way that sounds a little bit like this narrative. Or they hear us as adults talking about things that are caught up in this list, which by really logical impact might lead us back to this sort of space of like, okay, well, if that's all you believe, if you think that I'm broken, I'll show you broken. Or if you think that I'm broken, let me work really, really hard to show you that I'm not. I'm going to raise my hand. I'm going to overdo work. I'm going to show up early. I'm going to need you all the time. I don't want you to think that thing about me. But all of that is only coming from a space in which this thing lives. Right? I either have to succumb to it or prove to you that it's not right. And if I'm at any point operating in that space as a kid, then I don't even have the actual full capacity to engage in the thing that you're presenting me with, right? In the learning, in the lesson, in the engagement, in the SEL, whatever it is you're putting in front of me. And so our pathway to Innocent Classroom is this individual child-specific approach that focuses on, we've talked about a little bit, that good, right? That for which all else is done. Is that every single one of our kids, if we know them well enough, or if we even begin to think about how we're thinking about this thing, can see that one of these things is living underneath all of the feelings, all of the behaviors, all of the good days, all of the bad days, all of the days the kid's there, not there, all of the things they're willing to tell us, not tell us, right? Telling you to F off is a child telling you something that comes from this space. And if we don't get really good at thinking about it differently, it's almost sure that this thing is creeping in somewhere. And if this thing is creeping in somewhere, this narrative, it gets us all the way further and further away, right, from the liberating education, right? That space of curiosity and creativity. And in all honesty, the things that were true about our children over the course of the pandemic, right? Instead of thinking about all of those things we talked about, what if we start from a different place first of thinking about what our kids might bring? Maybe they learned more than we know. And Keith just pointed that out for us, right? Maybe they had increased potential or see themselves as having increased potential in this space. Maybe they felt safe not coming to school. Maybe we saw this level of care for learning and classmates. I mean, how many of you saw children as young as 5, as old as 18, and anywhere in between doing things for their siblings, for their neighbors, for their classmates, worrying about you, right? They paid attention in different ways. Maybe they turned off their camera, but maybe they were there, right? They had to make some hard decisions. And 18 months of doing these things over and over, that's some exponential dang learning, right? And it may not be the way we are taught to think about it. It may not be the way that we sometimes have to think about it as educators, but it's the way our kids are thinking about it. They're not thinking about the learning loss the way you're thinking about it. And in fact, the further we go down that pathway, the further they're going to go away from this narrative that potentially they could see about themselves, that what they learned mattered, that what they went through was powerful, right? It wasn't just damaging and hard and overwhelming and broken. And the more that we add that on, the deeper underneath that narrative our kids are finding themselves. And so there's this charge in many ways, right, is to fully be aware of and understand that this narrative, right, it grabs our children's attention. It hijacks in many ways the time they have with us. if we aren't intentional, if we aren't even honest about the impact, right? Everybody in some ways can relate to this, right? Every single person here, I think, can say, yeah, I've been in that time where I thought about a narrative that exists about me, kind of hijacked my ability to be fully there. But it's not universally acknowledged. I don't think we talk about it as educators a lot. We kind of hope it's going to go by and that our kids are okay. And it's not evenly distributed. And that's part of our conversation as we talk about kids, right? As you're even talking now, is it matters differently to different kids, right? To every individual child. And ultimately, our children bear the greatest weight if we don't make an intentional effort to diffuse it and overcome it. I know we're running up on our end of time here, and we never want to leave people in a space of just philosophically or wherever, if you're like, yeah, this makes sense, or this was a horrible conversation, or what do I do now? Because the reason I fell in love with this work was that innocence is something I can immediately do. I don't have to go put together a committee and put together a 3-year plan and make sure that everyone's bought in. I can immediately, with a child in front of me, begin to construct through my relationship with them a space that says, nah, not here, right? We're not going to let that creep in. And I'm going to do it for you. I'm not going to do it for me because I need to feel good as a white person in this space or whatever it is, right? So I'm going to do it for you because I know for you, the thing that we are doing matters. And I know that there's a chance that you don't believe me. So let me help you believe this, right? As we wrap up, I would love if you've got thoughts just to drop them in the chat, because the collective conversation is so powerful. Or what are things that maybe you're thinking about or you've heard about that you can do in your role or whatever you do, right? That you might be able to do for a child. As you go to work today, or you're already at work, or tomorrow, over the course of the next week, as you're thinking about this, what are ways we can begin to think or do differently? Of course, we would love to see more of you and hear more of you. So I do want to share opportunities to further the conversation. And we are excitingly more active and busy than we've ever been as a company. And hopefully you'll see more of us as we're hitting the fall here. We would love to talk individually with you about anything you're thinking or wondering about your role, your space, what we're talking about. So Matt's dropping those links in the chat. Set up a time just to chat with us. This is what we live for, this conversation. People who are passionate about. We live for people who want to argue with us about us too, challenge us. We do have our 2021 Innocent Classroom Conference coming up. It is one of my favorite times of the year because it's hundreds of people from across the country coming together to have this conversation a little bit more extended. You can follow us on any of our social media platforms. Quick shout out to Quentin, who's been doing just a beautiful job of connecting us with people. So I wish I was a better social media person in many ways. If you are, it's a great way to talk to us, engage with us, and follow us, be on the journey with us. So all those links are in the chat. If you are interested, a little bit more about the conference, just because I'm going to show this slide, what you can anticipate. Save the date. It's free registration. If for those that matter, you'll get your credit hours and all of that good stuff for licensure and stuff. But more importantly, I think it's one of the most hopeful, inspiring days, led by community, for community, and about children. That I don't know. It's weird for me to say that I've ever been to, because I guess we put it on, but at the same time, the coolest thing I've gotten to participate in. So really sincere gratitude for being here with us, taking time out of already really important time that you have with children, or whatever role that you have at home, as a parent, in admin, as an early childhood educator, as a college educator, whatever that might be. It means so much to us that you're willing to be here with us and continue to push us and push ourselves in towards an education system, towards really a way of being in which innocence, a freedom from these narratives, starting with our Black, Brown, Indigenous children, that can be pervasive, that can be presumed, and that can be transformational. Really, really grateful. Appreciate you all. Thanks, Shalina. It was really, really good to have you here. Always good to have you here, Shalina. And stick around if you want to talk further. Well, I'll be here, or put questions in the chat. But we hope to see you at any and everything that we're doing. So thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. This is really, I could put in the chat. It's a great way to start a Wednesday. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for bringing your full selves. And we really hope to see you again. These are the conversations we feel like we can have more of. So please, we hope to see you again. Thanks.